Hi guys. So, welcome. Um, this is how to protect your project from start to finish, part 2 of 4. Um, this is a Clear on Black webcast. I'm Carl Ross, President and CEO, and we are Clear on Black is a bespoke interior architectural design firm specializing in upscale and luxury hotels and resorts. We help hotel owners, operators, and developers gain a dominating market presence and greater profitability by unlocking the hidden potential of their properties. Clear and Black webcasts cover hospitality design topics that affect the hospitality design community, owners, operators, developers, architects, and purchasing agents, and other allied hospitality team members. I and the occasional guest speaker, expert, talk for about 30 minutes and then take your questions for a few more. So this is the second part of a 4-part series on how to protect your project from start to finish, and it's project definition. In part 1, it was an overview. I kind of give a 10,000-foot view looking down and see what we have. And really what this whole series is about is an aggregation of what I guess has come to be a collection of best practices and some experiences that we gained in doing this for 30 years. So as I started out in the industry and looking at how projects went, and I thought pretty much everything was the same, but as I got a little more experience, I started to realize that some projects were really great and they worked and I didn't really know why, and then some projects didn't work out so well and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what in the heck was going on with these things. So after time, I started to realize, I started to see patterns. I started to see things. It's like, well, gosh, this worked really well here. Why wouldn't it work well over there? So in fact, those kinds of practices and those kinds of principles do apply across a multiple spectrum of projects in this industry. So what we're going to look at is in our agenda today, we're going to see a couple of things. We're going to cover determining the project scope. What goes into the scope? What are the pieces inside of that? Then we have project schedule. What's in the project schedule? What things do we need to be paying attention to? What should we be looking at? Then we have the roles and responsibilities of the people that are affiliated with the project. Who all's on the team? Then there's another piece to this, which is the project budget. And project budget is such an important component that it actually is the third piece, which is next month. And we'll touch on that. So don't think I'm ignoring budget. It is super important. So we'll go ahead and cover that in next month's deal. So when we look at the various pieces and all the elements, we start to figure out, like, all right, we need accurate definitions of every single thing on here, because the more specific we are, the more accurate we are, the less chance there's going to be for something to go haywire, something to slide off the rails. So one of the things that we've developed and we've put into place on a variety of different things is what we call SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym. So I'm going to give you some examples of what this is and what these all represent. So the first piece is the S, and that's specific. And that is, let's say we want to be as specific as possible so that we know what the heck are we working on. Well, let's say the example would be full renovation of 450 guest rooms. Okay, so that's pretty specific. All right, the next piece, measurable. An example of that would be, we're going to rebrand this property using new operator standards. Okay, that's measurable. Here's a book of standards, and we have to follow these in order to change the brand definition. Great. So the A is achievable. Now, is it something that we can really do? Well, in this instance, let's say we've got 450 guest rooms, and we're going to rebrand to a new operator, and we're going to now choose to achieve that we're going to take it from 4 to 5 diamonds. We're going to bump their mobile a little bit. That's achievable. We can do that. We know we can do that. But what are the other pieces that are related to it? Well, it's got to be realistic. Now, if we have 450 rooms, new brand, 5 diamond, are you going to do that for $200,000? Probably not. So the realistic component is Is it, okay, an $8 million renovation? That's a little closer. So you look at 450 rooms, $8 million, that's, under 20, yeah, we can do that. So that's the realism component. And partly you're testing these as the project is given out. That's a way to qualify it to see, are we starting out on the right foot? Well, the last piece, of course, is it's got to be timed. And that is, it's got to have a start, it's got to have a finish. It's not just wander along. We got to know when we're done, okay? So in this instance, we've got the 450 room renovation. You got a new operator, we got a new 5 diamond piece that we're going to hit, and we've got an overall project budget of $8 million, 18 months to do it. Yeah, okay, that works. I think that's going to be okay. So the SMART goals really do help on the front end, and it helps all the way along. So how we start to look at things is, all right, what's the scope? Let's determine the scope. Well, here's the thing, and I've seen this so many times. What's the perceived scope and what's the actual funded scope? And those are vastly different oftentimes. I've been at kickoff meetings where the perceived scope is we think we're getting the sun and moon and the stars, and the actual funded scope is you get a telescope. And you can look at the sun and moon and stars, but you certainly aren't going to have them. So understanding the perceived scope and getting that defined by the owner and the operator and whoever the decision makers are, and finding the actual funded scope is very, very important. And that's got to happen at the very first meetings. That's got to happen. That's got to be super clear. Next piece is who specifically determines that scope. That's almost always going to be the owner. That's almost always going to be the client. So, okay, we're going to do a 450 room guest room renovation. Great, that's the scope. Is it really, or is that all of it? Well, let's see. Do you have it all covered? Well, all's pretty gosh darn big. So when you think of all, well, if it's guest rooms, okay, so using the guest room example, is it soft goods and case goods? Are you gutting the bathrooms? Are you doing only case goods, or is it the full room? Are suites specifically excluded? So when you look at that, ancillary areas and connected spaces, that one can be a little slippery, because let's say you've got a ballroom and a pre-function area, and you think, yeah, we're all done. Well, the property says, but there's this outside area that is this gigantic open seating area that we use on a lawn that we're gonna have a meeting space where we're gonna do events out there. That needs to be part of that scope. Well, if it wasn't accounted for in the original definition of what the scope was, all of a sudden now you got a gap between dollars and need. So it's really important to have those ancillary areas and the connected spaces defined. Then the next piece is, how big is it? You gotta, and it's not just square footage, it's also room count, things like that. So what's that square footage based on? Well, is it a known set of drawings that the DOE has? The Director of Engineering's got this library, got a museum in the basement of the hotel that says, yeah, I've got everything and I know how big everything is. Well, that's great. But it can be something like the sales team has this 15th generation Xerox that says in blurred type might be something like, a certain amount of square feet. So what we want to do is be able to drop that and know what is going on in terms of the overall square footage and what's that based on. So then what we have is, all right, that square footage, is it verified, and by whom? So verified square footage is a whole other animal. This is all about specificity, remember. So verified by whom? My preference is going to be somebody that knows how to run a tape measure, somebody that knows how to read a set of drawings, and that is almost always at the property level. It's going to be a DOE or somebody on his staff, because he's responsible and knows how things work. He knows how big the areas are, how tall it is. So we're looking for X and Y dimensions, and it's Z high. That's really, really important to know that. And you don't, honestly, I've seen situations where there have been staff members at the hotel level that have been put in a position of verifying something, and honestly, it's just, they're not capable. They don't have the skill set to be able to do it. So I think it's really important to get the right people doing the right verifications so that you have that. Then the next piece is, and this is a really interesting one, when does it make sense to knowingly expand the scope? And that is moving from CapEx to ROI. Well, is it ever? There's a certain philosophy that says, no way, you can't. I mean, the budget's the budget, right? But what if there is an opportunity that if you did a little bit more something, you get a whole lot more something else. Specific example is we had a ballroom pre-function renovation project at a property. And the scope was very clearly defined. Here's the ballroom, here's the pre-function. Well, as we began to look at the plans, we noticed that there was a defunct restaurant bar that hadn't been used in decades, and it was right behind one level of the ballrooms. And what we figured out was if we could capture that space and expand it and change the usage of that space from basically dead space behind the ballrooms, we literally doubled the pre-function space. And we went to the owner and we said, hey, look at this. And they went, wow. They turned to the property and said, what could you do with double the ballroom space? He said, well, we would double the amount of meeting business that we could do. So now we take space that is basically unusable and not generating any kind of revenue, and we all of a sudden create a revenue generating space that allows them to double what the meeting business that they do. So that's a really good example of moving CapEx to ROI. So I think it's an important piece to do. So ultimately we have certain objectives, and that is, and I'm going to pull from the last webinar that loving piece that we call the big three: the budget, time, and the quality. And that is, all the stakeholders have to have a clear idea as to what the purpose of the project is and what the client objectives are. And that seems like such a, no kidding statement, but is it budget is the most important thing, or is time the most important thing, or is quality really, really important, and the other two are going to be subordinate to that? So that's a real key piece. Then we have, obviously, the accuracy and the thoroughness. Those are essential. You got to have that, because without it, 500 square feet becomes 10,000 square feet, and you missed an entire area. So you got to look at that. So there's also a piece that is interesting. This is, we've been affiliated with a new type of project delivery, and it's called Lean Project Delivery. We have a couple of projects that we do this with, and that is, it's called Integrated Lean Project Delivery. And it is this is a concept that says, consider establishing conditions of satisfaction. And what that is as a team, you define the success, what success is for the team. And those are the key elements for developing and maintaining stakeholder alignment. And those conditions of satisfaction are elements that it's not necessarily a tangible thing that you think about in the regard of, yeah, we'll be on time, we'll be on budget, but it's things like this, right? Yeah, the number of months in which the project will be delivered. Do you incentivize people for coming in earlier on that? How many RFIs are you going to target for? Let's say as a collective team, you're going to shoot for a fixed number of those, because obviously RFIs are a direct relation to the quality of the documentation and the understanding of all the contractors and all the people that are building this thing. Is what do the documents reflect, and is that true? Then what about the number of change orders? That's a biggie. Change orders can hit a job and absolutely pound an owner, and we certainly don't like seeing that stuff happen. So let's just decide what we're going to have for number of change orders. Then what about the number of punch list items, or how many pages or how many pounds of paper we're going to print trying to cover all the project punch list items. And then the last piece is, and we see this come up on a number of projects, and that is from the get-go, the owner says, okay, we've got X target budget. I'd like to have a certain single-digit or double-digit % savings of what the overall target budget is. And that becomes kind of a little bit of a stretch goal, because, just because the budget is, say, okay, $5 million or $2 million, it doesn't mean you have to spend it all. And it is always the owner's prerogative to spend what they want to spend. And that's sometimes hard for a designer to hear, but you really need to get that. And that's how this works. That's how management of budgets and controlling projects works. So, all right, now that we've got kind of the objectives on determining the scope, the next thing is we got to look at project schedule. So when we look at project schedule, there are a whole lot of different kinds of schedule formats. Each of them is valuable in their own right, and certainly they have an application for each of them. So the first one would be, All right, it's a shorty little document. It's, this is a paragraph. This is taken from a project that says, okay, July 6th, we got a site visit. We're going to have conceptual design started. August, we got presentation to operations team. August, we're going to complete design changes, the FF&E. October, specs and drawings we issue. And March 30, the installation and opening. So this is a soft goods renovation. This is a short project, and it's not particularly complex. There are no additional consultants. Perfect use of what this is. Does there need to be more? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So the next piece is, okay, there's a calendar based, and that is taking out your MS, whatever your program is, and start to put lines across dates and months, and what are the milestone dates, and what are the tasks and events that you have to do, and what are related to that. Next piece is Excel. Well, Excel is great because the columns and rows. Personally, I can't stand Excel and it's confusing, but what this does is it gives a great amount of detail. It's from tasks and assignments of who does what and is it completed, and you can track it, which is great. You have start and finish outlined. You have who's responsible, the impact, is it low, medium, and high impact, and you start to have different levels of priority to things. It's great, except that it doesn't really give you a clear picture of what things are. So those elements that in terms of schedule formats, those actually start to look like this. This is a network diagram, and it shows that let's say we got a model room package that is happening, and there is a subcomponent of that is issuing it. We've got the CDs, we got 30%, 60%. We have the FF&E specs running concurrently at 50 and 100%. The finish times are reasonably the same. So we start to see the interrelation of functions and tasks and things like that. And for the GCs on this call and the PMs on this call, I'm going to beg a little bit of forgiveness, but not everybody's in that. And by the way, we have pretty much a virtual project team on this. We have owners, operators, developers, GCs, architects, and PMs. So the last piece, and certainly is my favorite, that is the Gantt chart. And this is a beautiful thing. It has color, it has lines, it's got line weight, and it's got all kinds of information in it. So what we look at is every phase has its duration. There are subcomponents, and those are created by the individual entity or the PM to be able to do this entire project. So it's start to finish. What is everything doing? It's a really, really great tool. We put these together, and we go through and outline all those things. So this becomes a really great working tool. And this, in difference to the calendar version or the written version, all of a sudden you see, yeah. You put that up, you can track against it. It's a wonderful tool. So the next piece that I look at is, and this comes again from the Lean project delivery, and that is pull planning. Now, pull planning is incredibly valuable, but it is typically focused on a single phase in the project, say schematic design, as opposed to the entire project duration. And what it is literally a wall or two or three or four walls in a fixed location, usually on the project site, and the timeline runs across left to right all the way across the room, and every single person on that project is basically tasked with coming into that room, and you figure out how long it's going to take you to do what. So the individual stakeholders identify their needs, whether it's the architect or ID or civil or drywall, whoever. It's all the sub-trades. Everybody gets to put into this. So what happens is that as this begins to evolve, certain things become known, and those durations and the sequences start to fall into the wall. Well, those things don't happen in a vacuum. And the beautiful thing about pull planning is that you start to perform what's called give-get interrelations. And that give-get is, for instance, if I need a background from the architect before I can start my layout work on all the interior spaces, that is my kickoff point. So he's got to generate, the architect has to generate the backgrounds for us to be able to do that. So in order for me to be able to finish my design and do the reflected ceilings, I have to get that to the lighting designer so that they can do the lighting design. So that's the interrelationship becomes a really strong component, and it's cool because ultimately what you do is you gain agreement on what the deliverables are, and it locks down the schedule. And it gives you that drill down detail that you cannot get any other way. And this Pull planning and ILPD has not been adopted by a lot of companies, and it's kind of new, but I think this is a really valuable tool that if you have the space and if you have the willingness and the team in place to do it, it's pretty good. Now, these images that I'm showing you here, these are from live projects, and you can see that in the foreground piece, this happens a lot on the GC side in terms of it can be a week out, or it can be a day out, or it's the month, and you start to see the sub-trades of who's going to get what access, things like that. So it has a lot of viability in other phases of the project other than just design. So when we look at the project phases, okay, well, we all know that, okay, there's going to be the phases. So what you have to do is you assess the project phase durations, whether it's a day, a week, or a month, all right? So we have the phases, which is diagnostic programming phase. We got schematic, we've got DD, we have CDs, construction administration, and then what happens later? Well, you've defined those first 5 phases, but you can have schedule misses. And what do I mean by schedule misses? Well, let's say that you forget review periods, and those review periods are building department, brand review, design reviews. You have to build those into those schedules. And when you start looking at that, people nowadays, with the advent of events like this, a webinar or GoToMeeting, it allows you to get consolidation rather than being dependent on travel and people being face-to-face. You can cover a lot of ground, so you can have those review periods shortened tremendously. But what about when it's things like the building department, or you've got plan review, it goes in for plan submittal, and it's like, okay, you get it kicked back. What if you don't make it through in the first round? You have to build those durations into the project schedule. The other one is, remember, document coordination. We're huge advocates on coordinated sets of drawings, and it seems like such a simple thing, but yet rarely is time allocated for it in a project schedule. Because what happens is everybody's scrambling, you're in your own silo, and you're flying along, and you're going to do your drawings, and you kind of head down and you just keep drawing. Well, there's so much coordination that has to happen. It doesn't have to, but it's so much better if you do. So the document coordination periods are really important, and I think that those happen at milestone dates. Maybe it's 30, 60, 90 in the CD process. Maybe those coordination periods, maybe you want to have the GC in the DD presentation so they know what's coming. Can we get some early pricing? Can we get some ideas put together for that? So then we've got also, what if you miss somebody entirely? Well, that was us. We had a project where we received a project schedule. It looked really great, had all the right colors, all the right line weights, and the ID was represented, except there was no FF&E in it. And our FF&E represents half of what our output is in terms of design, in terms of coordination, and in terms of deliverables. That was entirely missing in that project schedule. So huge miss, and greatly impacted things. So you don't want to miss somebody. It's tough being left out. Okay, then scheduled timing. When does all this get drafted? When does it get put into place? Well, it's preferable that that initial schedule is put together by the owner or the operator, and then it evolves and it's refined as everything becomes known, and it's piece by piece, element by element. So I would regard it as very malleable. This is a work in progress. It's a living, breathing document. It also is nice that when you include the RFP, have that schedule as part of it so that the bidding people, the candidates, can vet it out. Now, the secret inside track of this is, of course, as you're looking and you're reviewing the bids and the submissions, does anybody come back with options of tightening the schedule, of changing the workflow, of reordering or redoing or shortening certain things so that you can start trimming time out of the schedule? That's something that we try and make a point of really drilling down and understanding what things are. That's a good piece. Then another piece is, once the team is established, you need to meet and confirm the viability of the schedule. And this is kind of a double check, really. But something I just have to say is that the team should have the ability to call BS and be heard by the owner. There may be things that have missed. Maybe there are certain oddball conditions that weren't accounted for in the original schedule. Maybe there's an economic thing, maybe price increases. There's all kinds of things that happen. But just have the ability to be heard and adjust if it is legitimately needed. And then the last piece, are there any special considerations? Well, what would a special consideration be when you're looking at just a blank schedule with a bunch of bars and durations on it? Well, is it a union or a non-union job? What is the trade pool like? Are there geographical constraints that would mean that you've got less trades in a certain area? It could be that you're in a mountain location in the Rocky Mountains. It could be you're on an island far away and there aren't enough tile contractors to do a job that's that big. So the other option is, what happens if there aren't enough trades? Then you have to import. You're bringing people from outside the area. They're driving, they're flying. Then you got housing costs, you've got increased costs, you've got potential schedule overruns, you've got potential, are you running 2 shifts or 3 shifts? So all of a sudden you start to look at that. Those special considerations need to be accounted for, and you're looking at that. So that kind of covers our schedule issues. All right, so now we're going to look at determining the roles and responsibilities. Well, okay, so how do we identify and hopefully control all of the project variables? Well, all, again, we talked about that. All is pretty doggone big. So, well, we got team members. Okay, so we know we're going to have team members. How do we control that? Scope, the areas. What are the subcomponents? What are the ancillary spaces that are related to it? How do we define that? What are the budget responsibilities? Whose budget's it coming out of? Is it a GC budget? Is the operator budget? Is FF&E? Which part of the FF&E? Then you got design responsibilities. Okay, who's responsible for designing it? Maybe more than one person. What about documentation? Who's responsible for that and how much of it? Then we look at the administration of it. Okay, so that's, once it gets underway, it's starting to get built. There's a lot of things that happen, not just on the GC side, but the FF&E side. So the administration responsibilities, how do you figure out who's doing that? Then you look at purchasing. And okay, so now we got who's buying the doggone stuff. Well, so are we done? Nope, we got one more, and that's installation. So if it's all designed, if it's all budgeted, and it's all documented, administered, and purchased, somebody oftentimes is going to have to install that stuff. So again, we have to identify who specifically that is. So what would this document look like? How could you possibly manage these 8 different crazy variables? These are all 8 different moving parts, and they all have to move together as seamlessly as possible, and no surprises. Well, that document is the differentiation document, the diff doc. This is a document that identifies and organizes all 8 of those variables in a beautiful, seamless, wonderful little piece that says who does what, when, how, and who's paying for it. So what does that look like? Well, I took an excerpt from one of ours, and we created this for a resort project. And what we identified was, you can see, there's the GC budget. That's all the basic construction responsibility of the GC. The FF&E, well, we had 3 different FF&E components. That's public area, spa, and guest rooms. Okay, OS&E should be in there as well, but at the time that we did this, there was no operator assigned to the project. So remember that this also is a living, breathing document. This thing grows, and as more knowledge is gained and more things are specified as far as who's doing what, this thing grows. So you'll notice on project team members, you've got the architect, acoustical, you got art, all the way down, A through Z basically, all the way down to vendor, water feature, pool consultant. Do you need all of these all the time? No. But what this is, consider it to be a prompt. Consider it to be, oh wow, I forgot about fire protection. Or maybe we don't need a graphic designer. Or do we need a signage vendor? Or is that going to be sourced out of the FF&E budget? So when you look at these things in this differentiation document, populating this team member list is really, really important. So the next part of it is, all right, once you've defined the people playing, you got to figure out where we're all playing. Okay, well, it's not, obviously we're an interior design firm, and we have a certain perspective, and we have a certain purview that we're responsible for. But the projects are inevitably always bigger than just us. So what we look at is, okay, here's the site work, and these aren't things that we're at all related to, almost never, but yet they still have to be spoken for, they still have to be assignments given to. So site lighting, whether it's parking lots, who's doing the striping on the traffic areas, who's doing the site paving, the pool deck, the porte cochere. So left hand side you've got the main areas, project areas, and their subcategories, and these are custom tailored. Every single project is done new and it's done fresh. And we're going to provide you all, everybody that's on this call is going to have the ability to download a fresh, clean version of this for your use. So what we have are project areas on the left, and then across the top ribbon you have the budget. You have who's responsible for that, the design. And when we look at these, inevitably there's going to be more than one party almost always assigned to it, because these are complex spaces, they're complex projects. So same thing for construction documents. Who's responsible? Well, is it the civil and the architect, or is it the landscape and the graphic designer? I don't know. That gets to be identified. And then in CA, same thing happens to that. Then you got purchasing and installation. Well, each of those being identified. That's pretty cool. So what happens if you have, okay, site work, that's pretty straightforward. Now, when you get inside the building, what happens if it's really complicated? Well, it's always complicated. So what we try to do is we consolidate like spaces that have the same variables and constraints placed on them, so that, for instance, in public areas, you can see we've got the registration area, we got the lobby bar, we got specialty restaurant, wine room, banquet, pre-function, 3 meals, so on, all the way down to the fitness room. So all those public areas are going to have the same amount and the same assignments to all of them. So whether it's budget, design, CDCA, whatever, and you go all the way through, and it really streamlines this process. So when we start looking at the complexity of certain spaces, I think it's important, if there's something unique or different about a space, it should have its own category, or at least you think about it. It's important to do. So then you look at what are the pieces. All right, so furniture. If you look at item 1, furniture, artwork, and mirrors, and blocking for artwork and mirrors. Okay, blocking doesn't sound like a big deal, like who gives a hoot, right? Well, we had a project in the West Indies, and we had developed this very document for that project, and we also had general notes that said general contractors to provide blocking for millwork as well as all artwork and mirrors. Well, we're well into construction, things are framed, and they said, we don't have a number for budget for that. We're not carrying anything for blocking. And for us to do the blocking is $1.5 million for the millwork and all the artwork and the framing. The owners look at me like, help? I said, don't worry, it says right there in the diff doc, he has to provide it. So what we ended up with is, yeah, we've got a little bit of time invested in this thing, but one single line item was $1.5 million save. So if it is on this document, you do it, and if it's not on this document, you don't do it. So one key thing in here to remember also is that there are instances where there would appear to be duplicities, or people, certain consultants or certain team members think, oh yeah, I could do that too. Well, if you claim that turf, just make sure that you deliver on what you say you're going to do, because if you don't, then if you bite off more than you can chew, you could endanger the project and certainly the other consultants. So if you don't deliver on it and in a timely way, or if it's not in your expertise, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. So again, we talked about sometimes that could trigger expanded scope or the need for additional team members. Go ahead and understand that on the front end. So let's, as we look at the differentiation document, let's consider what the best practices are. So I think it would be a great idea if you could make the diff doc part of all contracts that you sign. And I'm talking to the owners and the operators out there, because if you tie it to the GC and the architect and ID, and gosh, everybody on that left-hand list that we saw a few slides back, all of a sudden everybody knows what they're doing. It's simple to have as an exhibit to a contract. So the other part of it is take time to do the deep dive and get the scope and the party assignments correct. This is not the time to be lazy. I know this is going to be bloody laborious and it's going to be tough, but again, remember that 8 to 16 hours, depending on the project size. Yeah, it's going to take a while. It will be tedious, it will be painful, but it's going to save your bacon more than any other single document in your project control palette because of the thoroughness and the granular detail you put into it. So when you think about, oh, God, this is so agonizing, make the PM do it. Have the PM do it on the front end and create the draft so nobody has to sit around and watch him work. But it's rather you're going to be able to wrap that up and have that thing ready to be down and have people sit at it. So we're going to do a little recap here. I think SMART goals help. They help you. They're really beneficial. I would encourage everybody to use those. Determining the scope and the purpose of the project. You want to have that accuracy. You want to have the thoroughness. Know what you're doing and why. Then project schedule with phases. You determine the schedule with phases, the durations, and with the full team if possible. Last piece, determine the roles and responsibility in the DIF-DOC format. That is, it's a wonderful thing, and be able to sit down and create that. And as I mentioned, there's a little button on the right-hand side of your thing that has a download handout that is available for everybody on this call, and you can use that. So before we get to Q&A, I just wanted to cover the remaining 2 webinars in this series. Part 3, which is budget development. We're going to talk about the project controls, definitions, who has them, the areas of influence and accountability and compliance. Then we also have the last piece, which is communication and other issues. That's going to be a deep dive into something which is often ignored and just kind of figured out on the fly, and that's something which, with the right focus, can become a tremendously powerful tool to work communications and how they run better. We're also going to cover intellectual property issues and best practices around that. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take the Q&A and see if we have some interesting things coming in here. Let's see. Questions. Yeah. Okay. Question. Do you, as an interior designer, create the Gantt chart schedule? Not for the whole project. Never for the whole project. That's typically the project manager's responsibility. We do, however, generate that for our area of expertise, obviously interiors, which is then folded into the overall project. So we have that part of it, and we're able to go through and have those. Can I get the handout? Okay, if for some reason you have an issue getting the DIF-DOC handout, email me and I'll make sure and get it out to you. Here's an interesting one. When you edit the DIF-DOC, should we just delete a team member from the list if we don't need it? You certainly can, but for the most part, I think I would prefer you do the strikeout method so that you don't accidentally or prematurely miss someone or cut them out, because it could be things that you're going to miss. So you don't want to be in that situation where you can't do that. That list is a fantastic prompt for all the team members to double check. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. What we have next on the docket is you see the upcoming webinars. And let's see, am I using specific program to manage the PM efforts? That would be, we're using Microsoft Project as far as the scheduling aspect, but PMs will use either Microsoft Project or Primavera. There's all kinds of stuff now. There's also the guys that make AutoCAD have a whole software system for tracking RFIs, for tracking submittals, for all kinds of things. So I would say that if you're looking to expand that and use it internally, you could do a little bit of a Google search and find out and get some recommendations from people that you know that are out there, because I know for us there's a lot of scaling issues. Some of these things are, you know, a few $100, and some of these are many thousands of dollars, are incredibly robust. So those things are available to you. I would say get out there and do some looking. You know, for as long as construction has been around, this thing is continuing to evolve, and it's a lot of fun to be involved at this point in time. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap. Thank you all very much for your participation and your questions. I think it's really cool. So take care, guys, and until the next time, be good.